Golden.
All right. So that being said, now that I have you on recording, I'm going to, in a little bit more detail, just so if anyone watches this, it's all transparent. So I have your permission to record our conversation and to post on YouTube or other future social media platforms, which I don't really use too much of. Any questions or concerns about any of that?
Nope.
Okay, I have your permission to continue recording and to post this on my YouTube account.
Yes.
Cool. All right, so it's so nice to see you. I'm sorry for all of the rescheduling. I hope it wasn't too much.
This is the life we lead, right? It's totally fine. I find myself doing it as well. It's fine.
I really appreciate your flexibility. July was a unique month for me. I get to start a new job tomorrow, so I'm happy we got like this is sort of like my last hurrah. I got July to sort of prep for this a little bit, and yeah, get to close this chapter. So I am chatting with you, Stephen T. Licardi. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in however you would like to.
Sure. I'll give a little visual description and I'll describe myself. My name is Stephen T. Licardi. I'm a neurodivergent slash autistic social worker, spoken word poet, science fiction writer, multidisciplinary artist, and just all around dabbler. I like to play in lots of different realms and I get bored really easily. I'm a tall, thin, white man with dark hair. And my background is of a blackout poem, and it says insanity is normal. And I'm here on Monacan and Tutelo land in the Blue Ridge Mountains of southwestern Virginia.
So cool. I want to know everything about southwestern Virginia. I want to know everything about you first. I'm going to throw out just a couple disclaimers. So anything that I say today is not representative of any views other than my own. No institutions that I've ever worked for or will work for. This is just me. It's Susie. My other disclaimer is that my little cat, Mickey, is out on my terrace, and I like to occasionally look over and make sure that he hasn't jumped off or that he doesn't need to come in, and I might have to go let him in if he asks to be. So I'm going to try my best to avoid other distractions. As you know, there's nail polish that's wet because I'm not smart, and I had to take like the last 2 minutes before we sat down to apply a coat, but
I don't appreciate the self-deprecating, but the nail polish is fine.
Thank you. So I'm going to call you Stephen. That
works great.
Cool. So if you can remind me in a few words or a few sentences, sort of like, who are you? What do you do? Just a little bit of background on who I'm talking to, however you want to go with that.
Yeah, sure. How does one make bite-sized one's entire sense of self or identity, whatever that means? Okay, well, right now, for the past 4 years, I've been working here in southwestern Virginia, working with children and their families in rural Appalachia, which was quite different from what I was doing before that. In my role as a social worker, I was working with people with quote unquote severe and chronic mental illnesses. And right now I'm in the process of transitioning into private practice with adults, which I'm quite excited about. And so I'm a mental health advocate, and I'm really interested in what do we mean by mental health? What do we mean by madness? What do we mean by neurodivergence? Really deep questions about the intersections between society and humans and as a species and as individuals as well as collectives. And I really like to explore those questions, those philosophical questions through the arts, whether it's performance art and poetry and science fiction. Most of my science fiction writing asks questions about mental health and madness and what do we mean by those things. And so a lot of my work is concerned with that, expanding what do we mean by mental health and complicating historic narratives around those things. And yeah, just deeply questioning I invite people. I like to help people awaken their sort of inner philosophers, to ask deep questions and get really curious about why it is that we do what we do. What are the larger systems that we're entrenched in that influence why we do what we do, and how can we imagine other kinds of worlds? I'm not particularly satisfied with the way the world is. I'd like to imagine how else it could be, and I like to do that in community with other people.
Sweet. I had to inhibit myself from writing down 7,000 questions just now. I love everything that you just said. I'm gonna come back and ask you about most of those things, I hope. So thank you for the quick summary. That was great. Let's maybe talk momentarily about just kind of some of your background as a fellow human. Some of the places you've been, where you come from, the things that have sort of shaped who you are, anything you think is important. I guess the two questions that I will ask kind of on the nose, and then I'll make it a little more open-ended, is if I could ask how old you are. That always gives me sort of a sense of background.
Yeah, I'm 34.
I'm 34. Okay. So were you born in 88 or 89?
89.
Cool. And where are you from originally?
I'm from Long Island, New York. That's where I grew up.
Awesome. Whereabouts?
Suffolk County, a place called West Islip. Very interesting place to grow up. Although most of my schooling was kind of bouncing around the island. So though I lived in that town, physically that's where my house was located. I don't I wouldn't necessarily call it my home, and I don't have many social relationships affiliated with that place, and so my education gave me the opportunity to see lots of different communities and lots of different kinds of people, and lots of different ways of being. So I'm really thankful for that.
All right, sweet. Yeah, I think we were neighbors. I'm from Patchogue myself, so sort of familiar with the area. Can I ask a little bit about, you said you didn't go to school in West Islip?
No. Yeah, so yeah, I can talk about my education. Is that?
Yeah, so my next question was gonna be, let's talk sort of momentarily, but not just, I don't want to spend the whole hour or so that we have talking about past, but I think it helps me to have that kind of background. So I was going to say, let's talk kind of briefly about childhood, adolescence, college years. And if you want to, I would love to know more about the educational background, anything that you think might be relevant.
Yeah. Well, I think it is. My childhood was quite strange. I think I began having some behavioral issues in elementary school, that made it so that I needed to be removed from public school. What those behavioral issues were is, I used to have what were called sado seizures. These things where if I became too anxious or overwhelmed or stressed by any sort of emotional upheaval, I would kind of just throw myself on the floor and have these like very intense whole body fits that became quite disruptive to class. So around second grade, I was taken out of public school and spent the next I don't know, 7 years or so kind of bouncing around different special education programs, inpatient hospital stays for long periods of time, just kind of all over the place, trying to figure out what was quote unquote wrong with me, just kind of nailed down a diagnosis, which took a really long time. People thought I had seizures for a long while. But
on that really quickly, because you said sado seizures. I'm not familiar. Are like PSEUDO pseudo
yeah, pseudo
oh,
seizures. Yeah.
all right,
Yeah, and I'm referencing that based on what was written in my charts, which I got access to when I was a little bit older, and was able to. I was like, oh, I don't know what that means. So yeah. I went to many different schools. I was in the Eastern Suffolk BOCES programs, and in reflection, I'm really thankful for that experience, because it just exposed me to children from different socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds and different levels of ways of learning, ways of cognition, just all different things. And it was really quite a gift in hindsight to be able to do that. But I spent basically from second grade till 10th grade, um, I was just in special education programs. I didn't have a summer break. I was always in school. I was always going to some doctor's office getting evaluated for something. I was in, some kind of psychologist's office, some kind of lab getting tested for something. So and I was at home, I was basically left to my own devices. My kind of home life was, Stephen does things his own way. He has a very particular way of moving through the world. And so I think the response was to sort of leave me be. And because of that, I got really into the arts and creating and keeping myself occupied and being really curious about stuff because nobody was telling me not to. So like it was my childhood was pretty isolated, but it really cultivated a deep curiosity for people and for why we do what we do and why the world is the way that it is. And just playing in lots of different spaces with lots of, not with people, but with like art, in the creative mediums and things like that. And that poetry in particular, especially as I got a little bit older, was really helpful in giving me some language to describe my experiences, my internal experiences, which really were to myself and to other people really an enigma. And that's what all this testing was all about, was people were trying to figure out what was going on. It wasn't until an extended hospital stay at Stony Brook Medical Center where I had an EEG glued to my head that like people were like, oh yeah, okay, these aren't seizures, this is something developmental. And that's when I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. I was about 10 years old. So
Right. And that was
yeah.
by Gabrielle Carlson.
That's right. That's Dr. Gabriel Carlson. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the name stuck in my craw. I was listening to some stuff you sent me the other day. No, I do not know her. I know her name.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that sounds busy.
Yeah, a little bit. A
Oh
little
my
bit.
goodness. I mean, it struck me both the other day when I was listening to a conversation you had. I apologize. I don't remember exactly which recording it was, but a conversation with someone else. And just now you kind of clued into this idea of, I read the reports. That's what the report said.
Mm-hmm.
What are your memories or some of it, in whatever extent you wish to share? Anything you don't want to share or do, I'm comfortable with the full range.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think that's a really great question because I don't, um, you know, as I've been getting older, I've been having more of these interesting moments of memory is funny. Like it's almost like I
Mhm.
earlier childhood memories are being kind of re-emerging as I'm getting older, and I've been having, I wouldn't say super often, but often enough that they've stuck with me. These moments of like, oh, I remember that, and I don't remember remembering that. I that was an experience I had when I was younger. I'm thinking specifically, I was playing with a friend of mine's uh, nephew, and we're playing hide and go seek, and I hid in a closet, and I had this experience of I was in the closet, and all of a sudden I had this deep physiological response of like, oh gosh, but what if he doesn't come and find me? And I remember distinctly having that experience as a kid. Bullying, I would be, kids would play hide and go seek with me, but they wouldn't find me. They'd let me go hide, and then they just like leave me be. And so I remember having like, I'm like, 30 something years old, like having this like, oh my God, is this child going to come find me? And so like, so experiences like that, the town I grew up in, I experienced quite a bit of bullying, which mostly just came out of like, oh, this kid's weird and we don't understand how he is the way that he is. But as far as like some of my personal memories, I mean, the labs were really interesting, or going to these psych appointments was really interesting. I remember distinctly there was one where I went into a room and I was playing with a piece of toys. I remember it was a Power Rangers toy. And I knew that there was this mirror, and I knew that somebody was observing me on the other side of that mirror. But there was this really cool toy that I wanted to play with, and so I went and played with it, even though I knew I was sort of being observed and watched. And so like that experience of kind of being outside, like watching things happen, or and like being really curious about why people are saying the things that they are to each other, and like just not like that was a very vivid experience for me as a child, was just this sense of like outside looking in, um like way of experiencing stuff. And then as far as these like behavioral things I was having, I mean, as I've gotten older, I've understood that they were disassociations, or dissociations related to the intersections between like my home life and some of the things I was experiencing at home, and the being a neuroatypical person. Just when I had too much stimulation, I would just have these experiences, like kind of like being punched out of your own body, and until you were able to sort of float back into them. So, and that was always a weird experience, because it was like you're kind of in here and you can't get people to understand what's going on, and you don't have the language to talk about what you're experiencing. So it was a lot of that sort of like outside inside kind of feelings, if that makes any sense. um
I
yeah.
think it does. I mean, I'm already, a big one step removed from you hearing this secondhand. And yeah, memory is funny. You nailed it. Memory is funny. Childhood is funny. Yeah, looking back, I was about to ask you a little bit about language, because
Yeah.
that's one place that I really would like to go with our conversation. But I had this question for later. I think this one comes first. Tell me about some of these sensory experiences you were having, because I kind of want to move into like how your experience of language may have shaped memories in any way, and emotions. But sensory comes first. It's a more basic function. Tell me about some of the sensory experiences.
Hmm. Yeah, it's this is why I think poetry was so helpful for me, because it's hard to get at some of the. So let me give a kind of an odd example. I remember when I was a kid, I used to have this recurring dream where the whole dream was I had a piece of graphite, like that, like the mechanical pencils that like you have, like you can like make this really long thin of graphite. I would have this dream where I had this piece of graphite, and no matter what I did, I couldn't break this piece of graphite. As much as I exerted myself, as much as I put effort into like trying to like get this piece of graphite to break, I could not do it. And there was this deep sense of like, the laws of physics are not applying to my dream right now. Like, why can't I break
They so
this?
often don't.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, so, and there was something in that experience of like, I have a sense of the way the world is supposed to work, and yet I have this evidence here that is defying what I'm told the way the world is supposed to work. Like this shouldn't exist.
Right.
I think that sensation was very indicative of what my experience of things were just out in the world. Like the texture of like an upholstered chair, or like the color of a wall, or like the ways in which objects would orient themselves in a space had this sense to me of being uh like a full body experience of like touching something or smelling something, or like had this like deep existential like um sensation to it. And within that, it was really difficult for me to localize me, or like my individual experience, or like it was like, if I touched something, it was like my body fell away, or like my proprioception became much more expansive. It was, and I think there were these moments where I would have these sensations or these experiences where it was like I was dissolving into the totality of the universe or something. Like, I don't want to make it too poetic, but it was like the and I felt like a lot of my childhood was um like reaching up and trying to pull pieces of myself back together, because there was just so much to life, like the not just the sensory things, but like also like emotions, like our emotional experiences. And one of the ways that Dr. Carlson described it was like cognitively I'd be like a 9-year-old, but like emotionally my emotions would be like a 3-year-old. So I'd be having like these complex thoughts, but like I couldn't emotionally make sense of them. And I don't know how true that is, but like there's something in the dissonance of that, which like, it was, when I first learned about that later on in life, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. That gets a little bit at what it sort of felt like. Um, so yeah, so like it's just like this fractaling is the best way that I've found to describe how it feels, is like you're just kind of fractaling all the time.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. I mean, let me ask you this,
right.
because I'm hearing that intensity. You said something like the texture, something like the texture of a chair, or something that I think a lot of people would kind of look at as a rather mundane or an everyday experience. A simple sensation would become your whole world, for
Mm-hmm.
example.
Mm-hmm.
Would you do you find any accuracy in saying something like there was a lot of maybe like hyper focus or attention on different stimuli?
Mm-hmm. Um, Maybe. I mean, it was more of like a deep fascination. Like, um,
Mhm.
God, I can give so many examples of this. Like the one that's coming to mind is do you ever see the little pieces of plastic that they use to cinch the end of a bag of bread?
Oh yeah, the little
Yeah.
ties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a period of time in my childhood where I was like collecting these things because I just thought they were the most fascinating thing.
Okay.
Like just like I thought they looked like little pieces of cheese, and like and they had different colors, and I just thought they were just fascinating. And like so there was a lot of that. It was like I'd find a leaf and I would just be like, holy shit, look at this leaf. Like, and like also the sense of like, who do I show this to? Like, who else am I gonna make this, like, look how cool this thing is, or like look how I'm unable to make sense of this thing because it's just so, the complexity of it. So yeah, I guess you could say that it was sort of a hyper focused, but I think it was just it was just like a deep fascination, which I think now I would call like a deep loving, like a loving for just how like complex things are. Like just like I was, yeah, I was in Spain a few years ago, and I was trying to explain to a friend of mine who's bilingual. I was like spoons are like miracles to me. Like there's this thing is made of this ore which we've pulled up out of the ground and we've shaped into this tool that we use to feed ourselves every day. Like it feels miraculous to me, and I think that was um it's that kind of that. And I can't, I'm like, I can't look away. I can't pretend like it's not some extremely beautiful, um uh, mind-blowing thing. It's just, yeah, that was a lot of my experiences as a kid, and now as an adult too, to be honest with you.
I was gonna say, I mean, I love that it very much feels like I don't know you that well, but what I do know about you is you come across as very inquisitive, curious, creative. Right.
Help me,
Um,
God help me.
so thank you for that insight. That was really interesting to hear. I like the continuity between, like, having such, what do I want to say? I hate to use the words childlike experience, like essence of childness, that I think has carried over into your adulthood. That is something that I always wish I saw more of in adults, is that curious nature, and that, like, I don't know, there was a comedian I saw once described, like, his 5-year-old daughter is waking up every morning, and they would just wake up with this like excitement and vigor, like, the world, everything's still here, like, the energy and excitement, and like, and we wish that we saw a little bit more of that in adults, which is so difficult to do sometimes. But I really appreciate you, and I love hearing the insight of kind of where that started and seeing where it's been. I'll move away from childhood, I believe, after this question, but one that was really sticking with me earlier. I actually might have two, and I'll put them both out to you, and you answer however you'd like. But I would love to know a little bit more about when you, if there was any, if you have any memory of when people started becoming significant to you. Have they always been, or was there kind of like an awakening of sorts, of the significance that other people played in your life?
Mhm.
So that's kind of one, and that like really directly follows from the last conversation, I think. And then the one that I was going with earlier was, language is such a huge part of how our memories are remembered at all, and then shaped, and sometimes evolving and changing over time, right? Memory is not a stable thing. So I'm wondering how your evolution of language, language ability, or your experiences of language evolved over time, and how that may or may not have contributed to some of these memories that you're sharing with me.
Mm. Yeah. Well, to answer the part about people, um, a joke I like to say is, when I, you know, uh, you know, what, when I first came to this planet, humans really confused me. The I think I've always had this. People were always like, I never saw myself like separate from like, it wasn't like I wasn't a person, but I did have this sense of like, I don't understand how people are moving through the world. Like, I don't understand. It's curious to me why people are doing the things that they're doing. Like what is like, I guess you could call it like social cues or like social etiquette. Like it was something that was always just like, it didn't really make any sense, but it was more of like a why that. And then I think as I got older, and I remember vividly when I was trans I was taken out of public school, and then I was rematriculated, where I was brought back into public school in 10th grade. I remember so distinctly being sort of dropped into the social politics of like adolescence, and like navigating just high school politics, just like what, like, and like so distinctly feeling like I had a crash course in like socializing with people, and like really like getting into like, why is this person saying this other thing to this other person, and it's so clear to me that this person wants to say this to this person but they can't, and I don't know why, and like, and that sense of like, there's unsaid things being said, and there's like the verbal nonverbal cues, and all, like, being awash in that was always just like so interesting to me. And so I think I experienced, and I had a sense, especially when I got to high school, of I really would love some friends. Like, I'd really like to have some like some people that I could hang out with. And so um I've always had that kind of curiosity around people. As I've gotten, and as I started getting older, there was this deep wanting to have, interpersonal relationships. And now I have a deep sense of like, I love building community with people. I love meeting new people. I love creating the circumstances for people to come together and build a community with other folks. I've really kind of embraced this idea. I don't think it's an idea. I just think it's a fact that we are social creatures, and we need social relationships in order to thrive and transform our lives. And so it's become a real important part for me, of building loving, authentic relationships with people. I really do love people, and I wouldn't. There's a lot of social workers who don't, which is really tragic. But I really would. I really do enjoy working with people. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. Um, would you say that 10th grade, being plunked down and realizing I want friends, I would like some friends, would you say that was among your earliest experiences of wanting to be close to other people? Or what are some of among the earliest experiences you can remember, if not? And if those are, then.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the navigating the interplay between like, and this is still something that is something I think I'm interested in as an adulthood, like navigating the relationship between like interpersonal versus romantic relationships, and like feeling especially, as you're going through the lifespan and, you get into hormones as a kid and stuff like that, like what is, what's a friend, what's somebody who's I'm romantically interested in, like what's the difference there? Like, I think that from an early age, I had the experience of deep affection for people, a deep sense of wanting to love people, I think wanting to be loved came later, but like going back to that idea before of like, things are just so fascinating in like a very loving way. I think that was the same thing for people too. So like the earliest memories I have was a sense of like, oh, this person's really interesting. I really want to love this person. Like, how do I do that? Like, what does that mean? And so I
When do
think
you think those were occurring?
what's that?
About when do you think those were occurring?
I think I can remember that feeling like when I was like, I don't know, between 7 and 10, like having a deep sense of that.
Another
Yeah,
quick question. Do you have siblings?
I have one younger brother.
Okay,
Yeah,
go on.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
up to you.
No, and that. So I think that's always. I think I always came at it from that sense of I want to love. I want to love this person, and that creates, that start. Yeah, the questions around like the social relationships, interpersonal versus romantic, all like that all became much more, had to suss itself out, I think, yeah, later on, if that makes sense. So
Sure. Do you remember some of your first memories of being around your parents or your brother?
yeah, so this is also something that
How
I
do you
think feeds
remember?
into this.
I guess in essence,
Yeah,
you would
well,
remember.
I think this is something that also plays into what we're talking about. Like, I mean, so I was just talking about this with my partner recently, and like, what is like, families have different cultures. You have the larger cultural identity you come from, but then there's like the sort of like macro or the meso structure of your relation of your household. And my family is very much like, um, they will like how emotions are expressed in my household were like you would be doing all the things that would indicate that something was wrong or something was upsetting or something was, but you would never say it. Like language was not something that was relied on to like express what your needs were or what, it was you had to like constantly read between the lines. My father in particular is very notorious for like huffing and puffing and stomping around and making little snide remarks. And then you go like, what, do you need something? Like, what's wrong? And he'll just like, nothing's wrong. Why would anything be wrong? And that was a very big thing in my household. You had to be a little detective all the time to like figure out whose needs were what. And I think that it creates a lot of contradictions and a lot of doing one thing and saying something else. And as a when I was younger, I think it was very, very confusing. It was incredibly confusing and overwhelming. I just didn't know what the hell was going on or what I was supposed to do or what somebody needed or wanted. I think as I got older, I forget what they call it. Like that sort of dichotomous thinking of like the both and the yes and of things. By necessity, I kind of had to learn how to navigate it in my household. And so yeah, so like that's what I remember later being like, oh, a person could say one thing and be doing something completely different, and they can have both those things at the same time. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that was kind of the household environment we had.
Sure. When did you start talking? When were your first words spoken?
I have no idea. I don't even think my parents remember what my first words were. I don't know.
No idea, really? Are you
I,
interested to know?
sure. I mean, I might ask my folks after this call. Actually, I don't know.
I would be very curious to know because I mean, just coming from the neurodevelopmental perspective of was it on time around a year
Mhm.
age or was it later on like
Mhm.
people with
Well,
more.
I was always like behind in school. I didn't even, this is something else I didn't know. In school, like academically, I was always behind. I was always behind on my math. I was always behind on my English. I had no idea. I would just go to school and be like, oh, take this test and see what happens, you know? So like, I don't, I don't, yeah. So like everything, I mean, everything in my life feels like was a contradiction, like to be frank. So like, yeah. So I don't know.
Do you think that that's something that has stuck with you? Everything in my life was a contradiction, or is that
Oh,
something
I
feel?
remember being in like I guess it was middle school or whatever, and having this deep sense of like um yeah, like this deep sense of like I try and do this one thing and then this other thing happens, you know, or like I used to have this really deep fear, not so much anymore, but like really deep rooted fear of like sort of like the Greek myth of like the hero that is it's prophesized that something will happen, and so the hero does everything to stop it from happening, and in so doing creates the circumstance. Like I felt like that's what I was doing all the time. I felt like my whole life was that. Like my attempts to avoid something would create the circumstances for the thing that I was trying to avoid to happen. And I remember there was a period of time where I was really like uh I'm obsessed, but like it was a perseveration that was pretty present in my life. So
That sounds like it could be painful.
yeah, I think it was. I think as I've now I just find now I find it fascinating. Now it's like it is like, oh, that's interesting. But it was very you felt like you were out of control, like you felt like you couldn't do anything. You were going to hurt people. Like there's nothing you could do to avoid it. So um, yeah, it certainly was painful at times.
Well, I admire your ability to kind of, what's the word I'm thinking of? Just kind of, I don't know about celebrate it, but it seems like you're kind of going with it a little bit. Like this is how things are. I mean, looking at the background, you know, I could maybe your background behind your like, it sounds like you're thriving in the chaos. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think I've just learned that um, deep pain and deep joy are not necessarily opposites, you know.
I love
Um,
how DBT of you.
I mean, but sure, it's also just like I think I find a lot of it feels quite special to be able to be with people in their pain and to be with them in the process of discovering joy in that without having to give up the pain or to heal from it or get rid of it. Like there's something um so beautiful like that we can do that. And I think people really struggle with that it has to be one and not the other. So like I think I've learned that it's, you know, you can have both of them. You don't have to it's not, the goal is not to get rid of the pain. It's to sort of see it right alongside your joy or your pleasure, you know.
Oh, I absolutely, from what I'm understanding you saying, I completely agree. I mean, I personally, I find a lot of freedom in accepting hardship. I think is sort of what you're saying, like feels very contradictory, but
Mm-hmm.
no, I've been through painful things. It doesn't, I'm never going to say they didn't happen, but, you know, I'm actually releasing pain by holding on to those past experiences.
Mm-hmm.
The way I see it, it sounds a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more. So let me ask you this, and let's kind of use this to transition. I want to know more about your poetry,
Mm.
but I'd like to move away from childhood. Um, I would love to know how your experience of language early on may have shaped your memories, or however you'd like to interpret that. I don't know. That's exactly the way I'd like to ask that. But how has language impacted the way you remembered things? Anything about language from early on? Then let's talk a little bit about poetry, and then I would love to kind of end or go towards your decisions to specialize in social work, philosophy, and psychology. And my first question before that is what I have until about 1 o'clock. It's 11:45 now. What's your timing like?
This is all I have for today. So,
All right, so I'm going to drop you with the language and memories question. I'm going to check my cat really quick,
okay,
and then we'll come back to that. One
cool.
sec.
Sounds good.
He's enjoying. He's enjoying the big outdoors. So I'll phrase it like this. From as early back as you can remember or understand or think of, what's your understanding of how your language strengths and weaknesses, however you want to phrase that, what's the relationship between language and memory for you as early back as you can think of?
Ooh, interesting.
Take your time if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I know from like a purely intellectual point of view, like neurobiologically, there's a big relationship between language and memory. I know, for as an aside, I used to work in a language psychology lab where we were looking at the relationship between language and sound, which was really interesting, and their relationship to memory. So part of my brain goes into sort of the intellectual space.
I mean, I would love to know everything about that, but
yeah, it was quite fascinating work. But on a personal level, I don't know if I've thought about it that way. And I think I'm not sure is the short answer. I'm not sure how language has played into my memory of things. I think, I mean, what I could talk about is how there was a moment, I think, when I started playing with poetry. I wouldn't say I discovered it, but like started playing around with poetry, where I started having this experience of language can do things that I needed it to do in order to make things make sense for me. Um, and I think it goes back to those feelings of contradictions that I mentioned before. A lot of my experiences, both visceral and internal, as well as my observations of the world, felt very contradictory, like at loggerheads with themselves all the time. And I think poetry has this way of taking language and smashing them together in such a way that it started making more sense. Like it's like a dry wet surface is poetic. And like but there there's but that makes sense to me. And I have friends of mine, colleagues of mine now, that joke around that, like, Stephen, you don't know how to not talk in poetry. And I think that there's some truth to that, because like it's the only way I've been able to, not the only way, but it's one of the tools that has helped me to make sense of the world. And so I can conjecture and say I'm sure there's some relationship to that, how I consolidate memories. I mean, one of the things that I love to do, well, what I've realized recently is like Instagram as like a social media platform is a way for me to look at my memories. When I'm usually posting pictures from like months ago, and it's because I'm like returning to them and like playing around with them in order to make the memory of them more solid. And I think that is a kind of concrete methodology that I think I've done in my life in general. Is the memories can feel kind of fuzzy unless I'm framing them in some kind of playful, creative way. But I'm just conjecturing. I don't know if there's any reality to that.
No, I love that. And I want to be able to move forward, but let's come back at some point. I want to hear more
Yeah.
about that you and that's super cool. I love how all this stuff impacts one another. And it's funny that you have actually worked with, maybe if there's any way you can sum up in a sentence or two some of the things that you took away from working in that lab about how sound and language impacted memory.
Yeah. Well, I would say that there's the relationship between sound and language has more to do with what your brain does with what it's hearing than it actually has to do with the sound itself, if that makes sense. It has to do with whether your brain decides this is language and this is sound, and you can pair them together such that if you get this just the sound, you can find the word in a way that's not conscious, which is really fast.
Does the sound
Or
exist? The perception of the sound exist?
Yeah.
No, I'm at. Does the
Well,
sound exist, or does the perception of the sound exist?
oh, now you're getting real philosophical. Yeah, now you're getting real fun. Yeah.
Don't answer that.
All the rabbit holes we're building, Susie, all of them.
Let's talk about poetry, and then let's come back to psych and philosophy and all of that. Okay, so you were starting to say your friends tell you that it's seemingly hard for you to not speak in poetry. I love that. And is that something that you feel you identify with, or?
Yeah, I wouldn't have identified that myself without without my loved ones and identifying it. But yeah, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. All right, sweet. So yeah, take me from I guess this is my question. Would you say that you sort of, and I could be like far off the mark on this, but it sounded like what I was hearing. Do you feel like you sort of invented poetry before you discovered it? Like, was there some like well, this is how I talk, and this is how I think, and this is how I write, and the way I don't even know. Like, how do you define poetry? Let me ask you that in just a few words.
Well, I think I think poetry is more than just linguistic. I think poetry, language is one kind of poetry. I think there's something I'm always fascinated when people call something poetic, because it's like, oh, I don't know what that means. Like if they're like but I think.
Wait, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I think I've also cultivated this deep relationship with poetry such that I kind of see it everywhere. So I also recognize I might be a little biased in that regard.
What's your one sentence definition of poetry?
Poetry is that which arouses an awareness that there is something deeper and beyond what is just in front of you.
So inquisitiveness of what something can represent.
I think it arouses some kind of feeling, some kind of sense.
Art?
I think. What's that?
Is poetry the same as art to you?
I think it can be. I think poetry is a kind of art. I think for me, like here, like so when I'm driving down like the I-81 here, and I notice the relationship between certain kinds of signs, or like this, like ways that like words have arranged themselves on a sign, and I go, that's curious. That feels poetic to me. Or if I notice the way that the shadows are falling in a room, and they create a different sense to the room, that feels poetic to me. The way the two pieces of art may be arranged on a wall in a gallery, that outside of the art itself feels poetic to me. Like it doesn't have to be artistic necessarily. It could just be things out in the world. And for me, I just find myself like, oh, like, and I think historically my response has been to the witnessing of the shadows in a room, the way that things have arranged themselves on the world. I think my response has been to want to capture those things then in a poem, to use language to try and get at what I'm seeing. And inevitably it fails, but like there's this desire there. So, and again, that might just be my own relationship to it, but and now I'm exploring in my work how to create those moments, those poetic moments, through the interactions between people, which sometimes includes language, sometimes it doesn't. So yeah, and as I'm talking, I also want to be where I feel like I'm not saying anything. I have this deep feeling of like nothing I'm saying is like exists in some absolute truth or reality. I'm just like I'm just talking, you know.
Saying
So
things and yet not saying things, and those are both opposite and completely simultaneously true.
yes.
Cool. Okay.
Welcome, Susie. Welcome.
All right. So let me try my question again. Do you feel like growing into who you are now, that there was some sense of like knowing poetry and experiencing it before actually learning what the world has defined as poetry? Like, and that's why I said invented it. Like, is this something that you
Yeah.
came up with on your own and then sort of was like, oh, that's out there already. That's a thing.
Mhm.
Dot, 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 dot.
Well, I think about like I'm thinking about like Heidegger's idea of like ready to hand. Like there's this like what's that?
Not familiar with the ready.
Oh, well, I'm probably misremembering, but like this idea that like uh there's like if I'm not like my understanding, like language being ready to hand, meaning like you just pick it up and it has a function in the moment, right? Like to describe to a person. I mean, I think about this like the word autism, right? I don't know what autism means, but it's been functional in helping other people understand my experience, you know, of the world or get a sense for it. I think when I was go ahead.
Like a tool?
Like a tool, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like a tool. And I think at my point in my life, I was about 11 years old when I started playing with poetry. It became this thing that was like ready to hand. Like I was having all these experiences, couldn't couldn't make them communicatable,
Yeah, no,
whatever.
that works.
Um, yeah, like and then I found this thing that was like, oh, this will do. You know, like this gets at about as close to it as I can for myself as well as for other people. And so it was kind of it just felt like a tool that fit what I needed in that moment. You know, I don't know. I'm sure there's other realities, other dimensions of Stevens where like they found something else. I mean, Legos came pretty close, but so like it's one of those things where I don't look at it like it's just what worked, you know, like and it's continued to work. So I've continued to maintain an intimate relationship to it and have explored other ways poetry can be folded in and played with other people.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like it was perhaps therapeutic for you.
Most definitely.
Would you, or do you use this, or would you say perhaps could poetry possibly be useful for people with autism, autistic people, to help them with emotions or being able to
Yeah,
communicate things?
I think yeah. I mean, I've certainly folded in poetry in my work with people on the spectrum, people not on the spectrum. I think I think the caveat is you have to want to build a relationship with it. You people,
That's
I
like all therapy, right?
what's that?
All therapy is
Yeah,
for you. If it doesn't work for you, you know,
yeah,
same modality does not work the same for two different.
yeah. And I've also seen people who have a deep relationship with poetry that it's not therapeutic for them. It's not providing. I've had people come in and seek out my services. They're like, oh, you're a poet. You work with poetry. I want to play with that. And then we start playing with it, and it's not doing the things that we feel like it needs to do or would like it for it to do, and we realize that that's a different kind of relationship. So like it's one of the many things that's in the toy chest that we could play around with, and see if it works. In my work with as a therapist, I call it the kitchen sink method, which is I don't care what works as long as we'll just keep trying stuff until something works. So
Cool. Um, I want to know more. You talked about this experience also in another recording that I listened to you. You were talking about being a kid and writing an essay as a really long run-on sentence.
Yeah.
And then going back and adding punctuation and grammar and kind of talking about how that was sort of how you learned like English language mechanics. I would love to know anything and everything about that experience. I found that a really fascinating little anecdote.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody, so I was about 16 or so, and I was really behind on my like English language stuff. And it's funny because again, I didn't know this stuff. I was just doing things. That was another.
Really quick,
Yeah.
I mean, as far as reading and writing, or inclusive of speaking and listening, and
Oh, that's a great question. No, I think no, I think speaking and listening, I was pretty good at.
so more the written, like the
Yeah, it's more like reading and writing. I appreciate the distinction. Um, you know, although I mean I was a quiet kid, so like I mean I wouldn't say I was super outspoken, but yeah, so like I was behind on my writing, and what happened was is I was sitting there on the bus one day and I had this idea for a story. And this is something about memory that I'm realizing as I get older. I remember stories that I wrote when I was even littler or really long, and I would remember like these weird like pieces of technology I was just writing stories on. Like that's all kinds of. So I seem to always have been writing stories or thinking about stories or narrative. So I'm like 16. I'm on the bus. I'm like, oh, this would be a cool idea for a story. And so I decided to go home, and every day before dinner, I would come home, I'd do my homework, I'd sit down, and I'd write this story. And so I started writing the story, and then I realized I was like, oh shoot, I actually don't know how to write. So like I'm like, okay, I don't know how to spell. I definitely know how to spell, but I know words and I know like what I want to say. So like, okay, I kind of know how commas work. So I'll just write one sentence. That's the whole story separated by commas. I'll just use commas to break up the sentence. And so I wrote this story as just one run-on sentence separated by commas. And then I was like, okay, story's done. I need to make this make sense to other people than just myself. So like, how should I do that? And so this is like right when we started we had a computer and the internet in my household. And I was like, so I like went online, I looked up, okay, what's a period? How does a period work? Cool. And then I weaved through periods. And then I was like, then I did semicolons. How do semicolons work? And semicolons were very complicated. And so I like went through and like did the same thing. And so I just through this story just was weaving. And the thing was, is like my brain is like, I'm not trying to self-teach myself how to write. I'm just like, I got to get this story to make sense. This story has to make sense to somebody else besides me for whatever reason. And so
found a motivation to
yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is right when I started getting back into high school. So I was thinking more about other people, right? And like social relationships. So then I did that.
let my cat in.
Go for it.
Pause. You were just starting to learn about social relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I was thinking more about, ooh, these stories can be for somebody else besides me. And so I think that was sort of the motivation. And then pretty quickly after that, it was just like, oh, this is how a period works. Oh, this is how, sentence structure works. And it just came out of the need to write this story. Yeah.
Have you, so something that I think a lot about is the relationship between motivation and learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Oh, I was extremely motivated to figure out how to use these tools of language to make the story make sense. So I mean, there was something about that story, writing that story, and I've come back to it a whole bunch of times in my life. That what provided the motivation to want to learn, to self-teach myself these things. So yeah, I think and then when I work with children, I mean, the incentive, right, is really important, not only for the child, but also the parent as well. Like if this kid needs to learn how to do this thing, we need to figure out how to make it meaningful to the child as well as their caregiver, because their caregiver doesn't really care about them learning anything. They're not going to really care either. Although in this situation, I mean, my parents had no idea I was writing this story, so it was just, it was self motivated. But yeah, I think motivation is really important. Incentive is really important for learning.
And how does that play into your work as a therapist?
Uh,
It sounds like it does on some level. You were just starting to.
sure. Well, I mean, I think, sometimes, I mean, quite often people come in that are looking for quote unquote help. And, you know, I might have a sense of the work that needs to be done. And you know, I might have a sense of, oh, okay, you have this problem. This might be where it's coming from. We need to work on that. But sometimes the client or the individual is like, I don't want to do that. I'm not motivated to do that. I'm not motivated to work on that thing. And so I have to learn to go, okay, well, what does motivate you, or what do you want to work on? Really meet you where you're at. And maybe we'll come back around to that other thing, or maybe it's irrelevant. Maybe it doesn't, maybe we don't. Maybe that's just me wanting something for this person that they don't want. So it's it's interplay between awakening a motivation, or like inspiring someone to be motivated or incentivized, and working with their own motivations and their own incentives for things. And it's a delicate and sometimes quite difficult balance.
Tell me more about your use of incentives, or
Mm.
is about incentives in treatment.
Yeah, I mean, incentive is a difficult, is a slippery word. Because incentives can sometimes get into like coercion, which I think you have to be really, really, really careful about. Not, you don't want to coerce people into any kind of healing or anything like that. But you know, sometimes people come to the work of therapy, and they're like, they're trying to get somewhere, they're trying to get to something, they're trying to arrive somewhere. And sometimes that's the incentive. Sometimes that's the motivation, is to get to the thing. But sometimes they want to get to the thing, and then there's this barrier here. Or there's something that's inhibiting them from getting to that place in life, but they don't really want to work on that. And so the question is can we use where they're trying to get to as that incentive, or is there something else that can help us to get through that barrier in order to get them to where they want to be? And this often emerges out of the therapeutic process. There's a barrier that nobody even knew was there until you start working together. And so sometimes you have to get really creative about what the incentives are, for the person. Sometimes it's not enough to be where they want to get, and sometimes the place they want to get to is unrealistic. And then you have a question, which is like, okay, they have an unrealistic goal.
Meaning,
what's that?
Unrealistic meaning like impossible, or
like, I don't think anything's impossible. I think lots of, but I think sometimes people, well, for example, like, maybe somebody has a profound trauma background where they had a parent or caregiver that drilled into their heads that they're supposed to have like no emotions ever, and their goal might be I want to be less emotional. I want to have no emotions. I mean, I'm going to be the first one that's going to be like, I want us to have more emotions. I want us to figure out how to have more emotional expression. But that's totally opposite what this person actually wants. And so then it gets into this kind of funky, fun place, which is like, what's the goal? To have no emotions ever? It's like, are you human at that point? Like, what? I don't know if we can actually, I don't know if there's a way to live a full life trying to reach that goal. And does that goal come out of some deeper entrenched trauma? So like, so that's where you got to get exploratory and playful and all that. And that's what I love about this work, is it can be so complex and challenging. And a person with the same problem, two people with the same problem, can come into your office and have the complete opposite path to solving that problem, which is just fascinating to me.
Likewise.
Mm-hmm.
Really quick, I want to come back to, I'm kind of beating a horse here. Incentive and coercion and learning. And you're a philosopher, so I feel like I can.
Yeah.
Do we think that learning is possible without incentive?
I think it depends on what you mean by learning. Do we, I think,
I think
do, what's that?
in your definition of learning.
Well, I've worked I've worked with enough schools with enough children to know that some kids, many children, um, don't learn in the kinds of environments that are prevalent in things like public schools or public institutions. And how public institutions are defining learning is incompatible or not compatible with how another child learns. So is that child? So I think then the question is, the child may be completely capable of learning, just not how or what that we've sort of socially agreed on are good things or children are supposed to learn. So if the goal is to get that child who learns in a different way or has a different way of learning to learn the things and how the public school system expects a child to learn, in that situation, we're probably going to need some kind of incentive or some kind of something that is going to get the child motivated enough to want to learn that way. However, some kids, doesn't matter how much motivation or incentive you provide, they just don't learn in that particular way. And that's where I think it gets really complicated, because we do have the intersections of punitive systems in society with our education systems. And so, for example, here in Virginia, truancy, children who don't attend school, is a criminalized activity. So the child doesn't come to school. Their parents are fined, and they can eventually be removed from their care if the child doesn't go to school, even if the school is incompatible with how that child learns or experiences the world. So, like, this is where it gets a little hairy, right?
Well, let me ask you, what do you think of that policy?
Um, I will say that I have never seen a family reach the level of being fined. I've never worked with a family that was fined, and I've never worked with a family where the reason the child was removed was specifically because they weren't going to school. Um, but
Sure, it happens.
it's what's that?
I'm sure it happens.
I'm sure it does, and I'm generally really I think I just punitive systems work on fear. That's the primary emotion that's being initiated to maintain the kind of activity we want people to be doing. Is if you provide them with some kind of punishment, they will do what you want them to do because they're afraid of the consequence, right? And there's something about that which feels limiting to me.
I think
um,
it's learned
yeah.
helplessness, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, no matter how strong the incentive is to change, it doesn't mean I'm going to be able to get my kid to school.
Yeah.
And I think going along right with what you said, and so I'm a little bit more interested in our last conversation about the relationship between, can learning happen in the absence of incentive? But if we're going with, pairing an incentive that will change behavior, not all incentives will change behavior, and keeping a rigid uh, system that is governed on fear, I agree
Mhm.
on that, is just plain not always going to result in everyone getting to school, and I'm sure has serious cultural
Mhm.
implications. And it just, not everyone is going to end up benefiting from that in very different ways.
Yeah.
Cultural being one
Yeah.
way in which we differ in a response to a system like that. But
And let me just say that I think you can learn um, without needing some kind of incentive or motivation. But I think that learning itself can be the incentive and the motivation. I mean, I think some children find great joy in learning things. I mean, I think adults find great joy in things. I'm one of those people that has a lot of joy from something. Sorry.
yeah, there's certainly a difference between intrinsic motivation to learn something and extrinsic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I that's a question I find myself asking a lot. Is what role does motivation play in learning? To what extent is learning possible without motivation? Um, And it's something that I'm kind of exploring a little bit in some of my own research, but that's a different conversation. Um, I'm going to take a look at my notes really quick because I love all of the directions we went in. I want to keep myself on track a little bit. Maybe let's keep going. I don't know if I want to talk about social work next, or let's talk about social work next, and let's come back to college. Um, go out of time a little bit. So since we're talking about your current therapy practices already, I would love to know a little bit more about yeah, so this is going to be sort of like a bottom up, I think. We'll start specific and go backwards. So I saw you generously provided me with your resume. Thank you for that. So it said on there that you went through a gig where you were traveling to provide psychoeducation, including proper disciplinary practices and parenting skills to families. And I think that might be what you're doing now.
I just left my position doing that, but
I have it written in past tense. Okay. And conducting family-based therapy with children and teens. So that is something that you stopped when?
like a week ago.
A week ago. Okay. So then it's still relevant for me to ask about a little bit.
It's definitely, most definitely, yeah.
Mind sharing anything and everything about that work?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I love that work. I loved and I will continue to love that work. I think there's something really special about it. I was working in an urban area in Queens, New York, before coming down to this region in Virginia. And we live in I live in a mostly rural area where the surrounding communities are mostly communities that are experiencing pretty profound poverty. And I didn't know that social workers or therapists could provide services in the home. That wasn't even something that was even on my radar. But when I was
last time,
when I was offered the position here, first of all, I was like, I don't know how I would do working with kids, which is like an insane thought now. But my partner actually was like, "Are you serious? It'd be great working with kids." And I've really enjoyed it. So I didn't know about that, and then I was like, working in the home, interesting. And so, the opportunity to work with people where their lives are happening, where they're living, is something which, like, put aside a clinical way of thinking, like the access to data that provides clinically, like, put that aside, and just the opportunity to be with people where they live, coming from such a wildly different background, both regionally and culturally and income wise, is something that I experience as a profound privilege, like a profound gift that people would allow me into their homes, to be with them and to see how they live. I think a lot of people who are experiencing poverty, sometimes that's shameful, or sometimes that's something we try and keep hidden. And sometimes we can't hide it because it's just how we live. But it's something to be able to be with people in that, and to witness the joy that's created in those spaces, and the ingenuity that's created in those spaces, and the sense of identity that's built there. Like, I mean, it's just been a gift, to be able to do that. It's just a human being. Again, thinking about where I come from, like, looking at humans with this deep, loving fascination. It's just such. I've had so much fun, and it's been certainly quite challenging, but I really, really loved it. And like 90% of the issues that I work with families around are problems of circumstance, are the result of poverty. Not it's a lack of, it's not even just a lack of access to education. It's like, generational trauma. It's not having resources. It's a lot of different things. And so being able to witness and be with people in that, I think I really think anybody who's in the profession of social work or healing should do that if they can do that. Because it's very different to have somebody come to your office. It's very, very, very different.
Yeah, as soon as you started talking, I remembered the last time we spoke. I think this is something that I kind of picked up on because I also continue to and have worked in I work with children, I work with families, have been working in their homes with them, had the privilege to do so for a long time now. And I think that's something that very much shapes the way I approach therapy and mental health interventions, and just understanding, right, our knowledge of how we experience and understand the people that we work with. That yeah, I have a huge privilege to access, and is so different than so many of my colleagues. I know of almost no one else outside of I guess the ABA world in clinical psychology. I'm not a social worker, but clinical psych, neuropsych. People don't work in patients' homes, in families' homes, and I wonder, maybe I'm going to you were talking about generations of oh, you said the word and it's not the way I applied it, and I don't remember.
Generational trauma.
That may have been what, yeah, so I'm using it in a different way. I just have the words stuck in my head, but thinking of future generations of clinicians or therapists or social workers that you may have a part in training directly or just influencing through your creative and other work. Is this something that you would formally recommend clinicians do, is try to work in people's homes with them?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I the short answer is yes. I think it requires a certain level of you have to be respectful. You have to you have to have this understanding that people are the experts in their own lives, and especially if you come from a different like a different socioeconomic and cultural background. I think it really requires, especially in Appalachia, like this region, if you come in with this sense of like you're the expert, you're going to tell them. I mean, it will not go over well. It's just because folks around here are just very resilient. There's a history there, So I think the short answer to your question is absolutely. It requires a reverence for where you are, who you're with, and the opportunity you have to be with people, to be with them, and the communities around here are small enough that I've tried to make it a point to, if they have a court date, and they need some support to go to their court, even if I don't have any function or help, like, I mean, just having that support is there. So like, also exploring, you have the opportunity to be with people in their lives, having strong boundaries around that, but also what other spaces as an advocate can you play in that realm, because it is transformational in and of itself to know that somebody's willing to be with you in your life. That in and of itself can be transformational, especially if you come from a community and a family that feels historically under-resourced, underappreciated, and forgotten. It's but yeah, I highly recommend it. It's fundamentally transformed how I work with people.
Can I ask you to be even more specific? So you said just being there.
Mm-hmm.
What else can it contribute to the therapeutic setting, to be existing with someone in their space?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that this is not talked about that much in like graduate education, and it's can you talk about it? Like, what's that?
We don't do it, but I
Yeah.
might be stepping over what you're about to say.
No. I was going to say that there's, I don't know if I don't know if it's a skill, but this idea of witnessing. I think witnessing is this activity that is transformational. I'll give you a specific example. I was working with a family that was experiencing some pretty intense poverty, and both the child and the caretaker were dealing with some mental health, some depression, some pretty severe depression. And when I first went to their home, their kitchen was just overrun with dishes, just unclean dishes, just piled up everywhere. Very unsanitary, just dishes everywhere. And the caretaker was terrified of someone seeing that, someone witnessing their kitchen in that state, how they live their life. And the caretaker divulged to me, that they were afraid that their child would be removed or that they would be punished in some way, and all that. And and I reassured them that no, that's not what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in understanding, how did this happen? Is there something we can do? Do you want to change this? Is this something you want to change? Can you change it? What do we need to do around it? And so and you also have to recognize, I'm as a social worker stepping into their home, I'm already in a position of power. This person is already relating to me as having the power of removing their child, right? And so to say to this person, no, I'm not interested in that. I don't want to do that. I don't and not saying I'm not going to do that. That's very different than saying I have no interest in doing that, because I probably could, right? I have the power to, I suppose. I don't suppose, on paper, I have the power to do that. I don't want to do that. So let's instead figure out what do we do about this? And maybe we don't do anything, but just that act of seeing the thing with seeing how this person lives that has been compartmentalized as a source of shame and fear, and to sit with them in that shame and fear, to validate it, because it's not wrong, I don't think, for having that. But to just see it and be like, I am with you in this, in the shame and fear of it. I think that right there is transformational, and you can grow lots of things from that space. And I would not, if this person was coming to my office, I would have no access to that. I would have no information about that. Maybe it's not therapeutically significant, but it's meaningful to this person, this human being that's in front of me. So, yeah. So that's what I mean by witnessing and being with people, in what they're carrying,
Great answer. You're good at answering questions.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. This is fun. I'm having a lot of fun.
Yeah, likewise. Every time I do this, I'm always like, why don't we have all day? Come to New York. Let's get coffee, please.
I'm working on it, Susie. I'm working on it.
All right. I want to talk about college. I think I've got one more question in this realm here before we kind of get there, which is you just made a career change. So what are you up to now?
Yeah, I just passed my clinical licensing exam. Thank you. Long process. It was a long process. Cheers. So past that, so now I'm an LCSW, which gives me the ability to run my own practice, and so I'm moving into that realm of private practice, working with adults virtually, at least to start off. In New York, my practice will be located in New York, and so yeah, I'm moving into that space, and I will say that there's I've been in dialogue with people about this sort of social work pipeline of going into private practice. And so I'm really mindful of what that means. And I'm
again, you said what pipeline?
The social work to private practice pipeline. A lot of people who get into social work want to go into private practice, and so they fly through the programs, get their licenses, and start running a private practice before they've even experienced anything or actually worked in community with people. So I'm really critical of that. And I want to be really mindful. My concentration was in social policy and political organizing. And so I don't want to become so far removed that I'm not doing the community work, the work of transforming systems that people are entrenched in. which sometimes happens in private practice. You kind of get entrenched in your practice and that's it. I'm not really interested in that. So this is going to be a new endeavor for me, and I'm going to be exploring it with other colleagues and all that jazz. So
Great, congratulations. And just to clarify, that's a private practice, doing psychotherapy, working on, okay, any
yes,
specific population other than adults, or range of mental health concerns?
no. So I'm going to be, doing psychotherapy. I'm interested in group therapy and coaching, which I think is a little bit different, like career coaching and things like that. My interest areas are creatives, people who are artists or looking to unlock their creativity, or trying to get back to their creativity in some way, and then people who are identify as neurodivergent. Um, maybe that's new for them, or people who are on the spectrum, that sort of thing. Those are sort of my focus areas, but I'm going to work with adults just because it's simpler. But I'm going to miss working with the kiddos, so might figure out another way to do that work.
Did you say you're moving back to New York?
Yes.
You are.
Mhm.
Oh, where?
Don't know. Working on identifying place to live right now. So that's where we're at.
Okay, maybe we'll talk about that off air. All right, then let's go back to college.
Yeah.
2 minutes. You, and actually, you know what? Before I ask my question, I've got to pee so badly. Mind if I
Okay.
excuse myself for a minute?
No, that's fine. I'll join you. Well, I'll pee
I
myself.
gotcha. We'll see you.
Okay, cool.
Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay. All right. So we were classmates.
We were. I was just thinking about that.
I remember taking the class on the Bhagavad Gita with you.
Yep.
I remember you sitting in front of me. Did we take another class together also that same semester? That you
We might have. We might have. I know it was definitely that class. I don't remember if there was another one. Maybe I know there's a philosophy of psychology course I took, but I don't know if you were in that one.
I never took that one. How was it?
I remember it was 3 hours long and it started at like 8 a.m. on like a Thursday. So it was rough, but it was interesting. I remember quite a bit from that class. It was quite good.
What were, I mean, it's going to lead right into what I'm asking you next. So do you remember like any of the topics from there? Not to quiz you, but
Yeah, no, the two that I remember reading Martin Buber, later in class. And I remember his concept of the I, it, and the I, thou, which strangely has become much more relevant more recently, because I remember reading his work and being like, what the hell is this? And not really understanding it too well. Then again, it was 8 o'clock in the morning. And then I remember that. And then I remember we did a whole section on proprioception, which
Okay.
was really interesting. Which, is like, how do you know where your body is in space, even if you can't visually see it? And talking about the relationship between that and like dualism and like the body and stuff like that. It was pretty cool. It was there was a lot of like challenging Cartesian dualism, which was fun.
Sweet. I'm writing this down for later. All right, so you have a one up on me. I majored in psych and minored in philosophy. You double majored in the two.
Uh-huh.
How do you find that the two complement each other, or don't?
Oh, I think they complement each other fabulously, actually. Something I'm thinking about is, I remember it was in a philosophy course that I was reading Freud and talking about how, Freud was very philosophical, and he has a whole arm of his writing that's philosophy, and then there's Freudian psychodynamic. But I remember one thing I remember learning was like when Freud was writing about like the id, the ego, and the superego, like he really thought he was like reverse engineering the human soul. Like he like, and I think when they translated from the German into English, they used the word mind, but I think the German is more closely related to like the German for soul. Don't quote me. This is just how I'm misremembering stuff. So, but I always thought that was really interesting. Is it's like, oh, actually, this person who's incredibly influential on Western psychology, like, was like thought he was like doing this deep spiritual work of like, I thought it's almost like how Newton thought he was like reverse engineering like God's design, So I always thought that was really interesting. But the ways in which they feed each other in, I guess, practically in my work, all like as a therapist, it's just like getting really curious and like asking really like questions that I've had some clients say like I ask questions that are like they haven't had therapists ask them before, and I think it comes out of the philosophy part of like getting like, why is that, like why, like questions like somebody comes in and says I have a problem, and I'll be like, well, why is that a problem?
Mm-hmm.
And like
Cognitive behavioral therapy lens.
What's that?
Also, it's kind of a CBT lens, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, but it's super philosophical. I mean, DBT is pretty philosophical, and I think it's so like, yeah, I mean, I don't see them at a certain point. I get kind of like, what are the actual separations between these things? It gets a little arbitrary after a while for me.
Then let's ask that. What are the separations between the two?
Man, listen, all the time. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I think sometimes I'm like, I think all of it's bullshit. I think all of it is bullshit. I think like it's just, overlaying terminology and modalities onto just things out in the world and people doing stuff, and like, I I just bought online. When I get an office, I'm going to have my degrees, like my little paper degrees, and they're nice little, beautiful little frames. And then I just got this. It's a bullshit license, like it's like a little joke license. I'm going to put it right up there next to them so that people get real. It's from a website called Arcane Bullshit, and I why, because I'm a bit of a clown, if you haven't figured that out. Like I like to be playful and things, but also because like I think that there's something really healthy about questioning, what am I actually doing? What am I talking about? What am I doing with this person? Am I just spitting psychological terms at them, or am I building something with them. Like I think it on the one extreme, like I said, it's all bullshit. That's one extreme which is available to me if I want to play around, if it's useful, right? Um, you know, on the other, it's just having a healthy questioning about what's happening. I think it's very similar to questions about, is this person suffering because of something innately wrong with them, or are they suffering because they're entrenched in a system that is larger than themselves, that doesn't benefit them and is actively oppressing or harming them? Like it's that kind of questioning that I think comes out of the philosophy, is getting just really nitty gritty curious about stuff.
Okay. So where then do you see the separation between the two?
I don't really. I don't. If I try and make separations, it starts to feel arbitrary.
What's philosophy to you?
I think it is one of the things that um, humans do. I think we philosophize. I think it's some, not to say that other non-human animals are incapable of their own philosophy, but like I think that the, people can philosophize. People can engage in the process of philosophizing about things. And I think it's to be critically in relationship with the world as a part of that world. I think that's what it means to do philosophy, is to just like, how am I participating in the world around me, which includes, I think, asking critical questions.
Why did you choose social work over psychology?
Hmm. Um, well, the process of applying for PhD programs is a kind of soul destruction, which even poetry sometimes does not capture. But like, no, like,
About
yeah, sure.
your bold.
No, no. So like, I got into I went to a community college and got my associate's degree before I transferred to Stony Brook, where we met as a psychology and philosophy major. And I wanted to study philosophy. That was like my first choice. But then I was like, maybe something a little more practical. And so I went for the next thing up, which is psychology. And so that's why I double majored in those two things.
I love
Um,
the description.
so, so I'm, so just being honest. So I did that, and I was hell bent on becoming a clinical psychologist. I had a professor in community college who was a clinical psychologist, and she really motivated me and influenced me and was very supportive of me. And so that I was beelining for clinical psychology. And then I was engaging in applying for PhDs and realizing that like it's quite, I'm not good at test taking generally, and like it's not like the process was like, oh God, like it just felt really intimidating. I also took a year off from undergrad and grad school to do some writing, to do some traveling, and I was like working in different spaces. I was working at a nursing home. I was working at a young autism program, working with children on the autism spectrum.
You worked at Yap?
Yep, I worked at Yap. You betcha.
Ronkonkoma or Medford?
On Konkoma.
When? What year?
2013 to 2014.
I left in 2013.
Of course. Of course.
Sorry.
No, there are no coincidences, Susie. So yeah, so I did that, and then I was interning at the Mental Health Association of Suffolk County. And when I was interning, almost everyone around me was social workers. And then I also, at the time, I met with now a dear friend of mine named Terry Muse, who is a theater director and a poet and an artist and a social worker. And she saw me performing, and she sat me down and she was like, "Listen, Stephen, I don't know you too well, but you sound like a social worker. The way you look at things seems like a social worker." And so she really kind of like buried that seed. And so I went back to the Mental Health Association and I was like, "Tell me the difference between a psychologist and a social worker." And They're like, well, there are some differences, there are some that aren't. And so that got me thinking about it. And then I was reading about the American Psychological Association's relationship to the torture program that was happening after 9/11. And that left a real sour taste in my mouth. And then I started looking a little bit more at that history. So all of these things accumulatedly didn't get into my PhD programs, but I did get into my social work program. And so I took like a relatively, thought about it, but I took a kind of quick turn into social work. And I'm really, really glad I did. I found it, I remember distinctly being in my first semester class, introduction class, like, oh, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. So that was.
Yeah, that's great. That's what I love to hear, is that sense of belonging. I've got to ask a little bit more about, you said the APA's role in torture. So my understanding, what I learned probably day 3 or so of our ethics class in grad school, was that it resulted in the APA putting a line in our ethics code
Mhm.
that we can't torture people anymore. So is that something that you're aware of, familiar with, or have any commentary on?
Yep, I'm aware of the changes they've made and the public facing accountability that they've come out with. So yeah.
I'm not gonna. What's your take on it?
I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I'm all here for, people recognizing their history and owning the history. I'm also well aware that the history is very contradictory, and so, I mean, social work is not immune from. I mean, there's a reason why there's a culture around why people hear in certain communities the name social worker, and the first thing they think about is that this someone that's going to take their kids away. That's not uninformed. There's a history of that, so I recognize that the industry that I'm in, or the career that I've chosen, is also not immune from human rights violations, so you know
Let's talk about. All right, we've got about 15 minutes left. Work for you?
okay, works for me, Susie.
So let's have a few shorter discussions. Things that I would love to have long conversations about, but as we said before, there's only so much time in a day.
Mhm.
Um,
And cats.
what was and cat? I
Okay.
only have one cat. I am sorry for so abruptly cutting you off before for that. I could have handled that a little bit.
Please cut me off, Susie, please.
I have that urgency of like, he needs to come in, something's attacking him. So yeah. Let's talk a little bit about science fiction, something that I would love to talk much longer about. But I want to talk a little bit about sci-fi. I want to talk a little bit about gender.
Mhm.
And then I've got some like quick fire questions. So I think my first question about sci-fi is broadly, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I love hearing it. I would love to share with whoever might be listening. What are your thoughts on, and the reason why I'm saying this is because you are a sci-fi author yourself. There's science fiction in your poetry and your newsletter and other works as well. So what are your thoughts on what science fiction can do for us as
Mm.
humanity, let's say?
Yeah. Well, I think that science fiction is responding to the world as it is. I think that's what people sometimes don't forget, is that, like, oh, it's like this imagined future, or like there's this fantasy realm, and the relationship between fantasy writing and science fiction writing sometimes gets blurry. But like, I think it's responding to the world, how the world is, and it's commenting on what's right in front of us. And I think that what I love about science fiction is you can get as weird, as imaginative as you want with what we have, right? What's possible, you know. And I think you can ask really critical questions in a way that's not constrained by like, journal writing or like, these other platforms where critical questioning happens, but is often has to be done in like a very, very rigid way. I think science fiction can be as off the rails as you want it to be. That's why I love Philip K. Dick's work, because it's just bizarre, a lot of his writing. And so like, I think science fiction, and almost there's lots of examples of where science fiction has predicted or has asked questions that became very relevant much later on. They're often very uh, prescient about like where we are in this moment, and so I like that, because I'm someone who tries to think ahead. I want to stay with what's possible. What are the other ways that things could be? And so, it's a space where you can ask, what would the world look like if it was, universally wheelchair accessible, which sounds like, doesn't sound like that radical of an idea, but is kind of science fiction, if you imagine that, because it's not the way the world is. What would it look like if, there was, if it was legal to have marriages between machines and humans, right? Like there's questions around that. And what I'm really interested in is when you start asking those kinds of questions, how does it start leading into considerations now, questions about that start to inform what we're doing right now. And that sometimes happens only when you step into the fictional realm and start to take these things almost to their extremes, that it starts to give a clarity around questions I could be asking about something that's happening right now. For example, AI, or like questions around gender, questions around sexuality, you know, all these things, human rights, all this jazz. I think there's we have a playground for that in science fiction.
You have a nice way of predicting my next questions. What do you view as benefits and dangers of artificial intelligence in
Oh gosh,
no more than like 3 or 4 sentences?
gosh. Okay, so all right. So we were talking about language before, right? Um, uh, we share the world with lots of other non-human species. And like only in the last few years have we realized that things like certain species of birds have their own culture, right? Their own kind of language, right? So these animals that have been with us for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, they have their own culture and language. That's just been there, and it's developed on its own, right? But you can't. I don't think you can sit there and say that it's the same kind of language as humans, right? It exists in this place that's like, it might be a language, but it's outside of human intelligence, and human intellect. Like we don't understand it, right? Only now are we starting to identify that. I think as these technologies develop, I think they have the potential to start to develop their own kinds of languages, their own kinds of emotions, their own kinds of lived experiences, just like other non-human animals have their own lived experiences that we don't have access to. One of my favorite questions is like to ask is like, what is an emotion to an artificial intelligence? Like, if you go on ChatGPT right now, it'll say, I'm just a machine that doesn't have emotions, in the human sense. But I think it's entirely possible that there can be this emergence of another or new kind of emotionality that is to AI. So like, I'm really interested in, we've now developed technology that we have to have questions about our relationship to it, in the same ways that we haven't really figured out our relationship to social media yet. And I think we have the same sort of potentiality with AI. So I think it's going to become a question about what is our relationship to this technology as it continues to develop.
So I love everything you said. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more, and now I'm going to prompt 1 or 2 sentences. What are your thoughts on benefits and dangers of artificial intelligence?
I think there will be benefits and dangers, and I think that we can predict some of them. I think there are many more that we cannot. We don't yet know.
I agree. Um, All right, this is my last big question before a few little questions. So a few years ago, you made some statements that you posted on Facebook that I thought were super interesting. I don't remember what they are. I didn't dig back for them.
I couldn't find it
You couldn't find them.
either.
Okay.
I went looking, but no.
No, I was irresponsible and I didn't look back at them, but I know they were about masculinity.
Mhm.
I remember that was like one of the themes, and I believe there was something about sexuality in there as well. But um, I guess my question with that little bit of memory would be, what are sort of your current thoughts on masculinity, sexuality, any current thoughts you have on those constructs as they can either help people who think about these things or any way you want to go with that. It's my lame attempt to reach into the past at what you may have been thinking back then, and what are some of
Mm.
your current thoughts about those concepts?
Um, well, because I've been living in rural Appalachia for 4 years now, I think it's there culturally there's more of a presence of like strict gender roles in this part of the country compared to where I grew up. Although not that dissimilar. The town where I grew up in was particularly misogynistic, and so it's not like I haven't seen these things before. But I think something I've been thinking more about is I think we're in this moment where there's um, there's a kind of unraveling of how things are and how things are supposed to be, and they're whatever that means. Like there's all these conversations around, what is gender, what is sexuality, what how do we categorize these things, how do we talk about them, again talking about language sort of changing over time. And so I think in particular, I think masculinity as a construct, as a concept, has been particularly been beaten around a lot recently, and there's been lots of people who have like steadfastly held on to it and are trying to redefine it and sort of preserve it, whatever the hell that means. And something that I've noticed in this region, I've worked mostly with young boys, young white identified boys mostly, um, and there's lots of questions around masculinity and like, uh, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a boy? Like, what are the things I can and can't do, and what are the things I can and can't say, and what is weird? And with all these developments in like, you know, queerness and gender studies and all this kind of stuff, I'm I have become quite worried about like young white boys, young white men, especially in under-resourced, impoverished communities like the ones that I've been working in. I think there can be a lot of anger. And so like we're in this moment that I'm really excited because there's lots of unfurling, and what it means for some folks is uncertainty and uh not knowing what I'm supposed to do, who I'm supposed to be, what the right thing to do is. And out of that vacuum can come a lot of rage, a lot of anger, a lot of uh, a desire for someone to say, this is why you feel this way, and it's these people, or it's this thing. And that can be really lucrative. And I think it's and it plays into part of the politics that we're kind of seeing in the world right now. And so I'm all for like just toss out masculinity, get rid of it, destroy it, tear it apart. And I think there's a lot of consequences that come with that. And I think it proposes quite a bit of threats to people who are both disempowered and also have access to power. So those are all kinds of things that I'm reflecting on and sort of watching and have been witnessing firsthand over the last 4 years or so.
Thank you for that. Anything you've read recently that has been inspiring with regards to gender talk? If not, then and we can come back to it.
Nothing that comes to mind. I think for me personally, my relationship to gender and relationships and all that, the most influential thing that I've read was All About Love by Bell Hooks, which is more has more to do with like relationships and romance and things like that, but it's you know it's rooted in feminism, and it got me thinking a lot about my relationship to masculinity and all that. So that's one of the books that come to mind.
Thank you for that. And thank you for your views and sharing them with me. I really appreciated everything that you just said right now. I want to ask you a few more little questions. Stephen, what's your favorite color?
My favorite color, purple all the way.
Purple all the way.
Oh, good choice. That's like right up there with the shade of purple that I like too. So
I'm writing this down as if like I'm just used to taking notes about the people that I purple all the way. I think I just like that quote.
mm-hmm.
There. What's your relationship with music?
Oh God, it's such a good question. It's the joke I like to tell, but it's not really a joke. It's true. I grew up in a household filled with noise instead of music, and so my relationship to music is I love music. I love all kinds of music. I love learning about new kinds of music. I love listening to all kinds of music. I I very rarely go out of my way to listen to music on my own. I don't live in a space where there's often lots of music. I've never played an instrument. I like to sing. I really, really like to sing.
You like to sing.
What's that?
What's your favorite stuff to sing?
Oh, I all kinds of stuff. I mean, everything. Smooth jazz, heavy metal, indie music,
What's
EDM.
the last song you were singing?
I was singing in the shower this morning. I was singing a Slipknot song. I don't remember the name of I don't remember the name of the song, but it was a Slipknot song.
Do you remember how it goes?
Let's see. Trying to remember now. It's been years since anyone could be a friend. That's how it starts off. So
You have a nice voice.
thank you.
You know, I mean, you're now we're coming full circle. You're a poet. That's not too surprising. What do you do for fun? What are you best at?
Oh God. What do I do for fun? I get into trouble. That's what I do for fun. No. I think honestly on this call we've talked about most of the things I do for fun. So
Sweet. All right, one big question, one quick question. Big question is, what do you think makes humans unique from other species?
uh, um I'm thinking about Octavia Butler and her her idea that God is change. The only lasting truth is change. Um, I think that humans change things. I think that's what we do in a way that is curious and beautiful and transformational, and also destructive and disgusting and horrible. But I think we have this command, not really command, like this relationship to change, which we just do, you know. And sometimes it's divine and sometimes it's devilish, and it's just all the things in between. So there's something about change which humans just have this relationship to, which, yeah, we change and we change things.
You've certainly given me something to think about. I haven't. It makes sense. You have a lot of focus on development throughout a lot of your work, I've noticed. So that was a characteristic answer that I can give some more thought to.
Mhm.
My last question is, I think, quick. It's big in concept, and I should have asked it first or among when I was asking, who are you? Where are you from? How old are you? So I'm going to bookend it with second most importance. It comes last, so hopefully people will hear it and helps me understand more of who you are and your perspective. How would you identify with regards to race and ethnicity?
Oh, uh, I am a white man. Uh, I'm among those who have come to be known as white. Um, I was raised as an Italian American was my cultural identity. Um, yeah. Does that answer your question? You need some more. Okay.
You think it answers? Yep, works for me.
Yeah, that it, yeah, that works. It's something I'm constantly reflecting on. I'm like, what does that mean? Like everything else. So, but yeah.
Yep. Um, Great. I apologize for not asking earlier. That was my mistake. And do you speak any languages other than English?
I don't, unfortunately. I'm stuck with English. Although I admire all languages. I think they all sound gorgeous. So
Thank you for sharing your time with me today. This was lovely. I hope you get in touch when you move back to New York or know where you're coming to. I would love to actually get together and have a coffee or a tea or a water or whatever.
some kind of uh, potent potable.
Awesome. I love it. Or just come over for pizza, bring your partner. You know, we love cooking for everyone. So that would be,
Okay, I'm going to take you up on that, Susie.
I
So.
would love that. Please be in touch whenever. Thank you so much for this. I learned a lot from you and you've given me a lot to think about.
Yay, great. Well, I would love to hear your reflections and your thoughts afterwards. So
All right. You're cool if I post this on YouTube and Facebook?
yeah, that's fine.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. I hope to talk to you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You will. You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.